Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Social Club at the End of This World. We'll start. Whoops! Now we're starting. Welcome, everyone, to the Social Club at the End of This World. We'll start with personal updates, and then we'll talk agenda, and then we'll dive into the topics. So, starting with Dan from Chicago, take it away, Dan.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm recovering from a cold, I hope, and my voice may be a little bit problematic. But in any case, living in Chicago, a lot of my energy goes into local issues and things that are happening, and I just thought I'd mention a couple of things. One is, Chicago, I believe, is probably, in terms of concentration of wealth, I could be wrong about the number I'm going to throw out here, but I think it's ranked about 7th in the world in actual concentration of wealth. So it's a very, very wealthy place, but as the metaphor of a tale of two cities is certainly true in Chicago. I think that statistically, something I saw fairly recently, so Chicago has maybe 3,100 or more people who reside in the city that have assets beyond $30 million, and then say 13 wealthiest are worth maybe over 50 billion at this point in time. So we have a lot of wealth in the city of Chicago, but we also have statistics like African American males between the age of 20 and 24, 45% of that demographic are unemployed. And, it doesn't get any better if you go below the age of, say between 16 and 20. And we're not taking into account what percentage of those young men are already, have a legal history behind their name. So we have going on here in Chicago something which is really unfortunate, where lately, there have been groups of young, mostly African Americans, men and women, going downtown to the tourist areas of the city and kind of, they use the word wilding, and that means, harassing people, stealing, iPhones, that type of thing, sometimes beating someone up. And then we have the reaction to that. Which is, again, it just boils down to we end up getting a racial tribalism problem going here. And there doesn't seem to be any ability to talk about it realistically. For example, how about having some program in place where young men coming from deindustrialized Chicago who are unable to get employment, that there be some kind of a program where they can be socialized in a different kind of a way rather than the gang culture socialization, which we have. So that's just a little update from Chicago, and there's ongoing debates. One other thing I'll say again with my consciousness, I've been watching the Game of Thrones, and of course I don't know if this is the last season and I don't know how many of you guys in the club watch it. But I came across this article in truthout.org, which was very upset with the, normal metaphor applied to Game of Thrones, which is it represents, climate change coming on, these 7 kingdoms. And now everybody has to get past their kind of tribalistic conflicts and defend essentially the world against the White Walkers, etc., the dead. This article in truthout.org wanted to say, well, no, there's a narrative that really fits this more accurately, and that narrative is, we're going to build a wall along the southern border, and we want to keep people out, and sort of turning it into a a racial or identity politics kind of metaphor to describe what was going on with the Game of Thrones. And again, so what we see is we just have these these different interpretations of what's going on. And I just wanted to throw that out there. It's some things that I've been thinking about, not exactly related directly to climate change, but I think as we go through our discussion, I'll be able to refer back to this. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dan. And we're doing personal updates. Welcome, Fred. If you got a personal update for us, fire away. And you're on mute there.
I'm not anywhere I can talk freely.
Oh, no problem, no problem. All right, no problem, Fred. Great to see you. Thanks for being here. On to Miles. Take it away, Miles. Personal updates.
Okay, hi everybody. I'll just adjust my little cap here. Up here in Alberta, Canada. Last week, very unseasonably chilly snow, and the snow actually sat on the ground for some time. It looked like Christmas, and yet it was the 1st of May. Anyway, weather weirding. Probably why there are the tornadoes down in Oklahoma, because of the contrast in the cold here, where the center of cold is shifting maybe from the North Pole, where it should be, further south over here, and creating all this havoc. My update is this afternoon, I'm going to a local university. It's a little university called St. Mary's University, and I'm taking a Introduction to Indigenous Studies course. I'm auditing it, and a friend that I know through some other events is an instructor. Michelle Scott and Evelyn Goodstriker are leading this course. It's 6 hours a week for the next couple of months. So I'm on Treaty 7. This is one of the books that I bought as part of this course, because I really feel that the Indigenous wisdom has a lot to teach us about walking softly on Mother Earth. It's something we've neglected to attend to and appreciate. 3 things, for example, the Indigenous wisdom brings is the concept of thinking of the 7th generation. I'd never heard of anybody talking about decision making where, you have to think about, well, what's this going to do to 7 generations hence, our great-grandchildren's great-grandchildren. Another example is the concept of sharing. They had a sharing economy. And again, it's like, okay, what would a sharing economy look like today if we were to shift to it? And then a third thing that I find fascinating is, it's slipped my mind, but essentially the concept of Mother Earth and all our relations is really the third. They always appreciate that we are in relationship to all the other sentient beings. And, our industrial agriculture and industrial harvesting of chickens, pigs, and cattle is just gone crazy. And there's no sense of the sacred with respect to how we treat those animals. 50 billion chickens a year are consumed. So anyway, that's my update. I hope to learn to appreciate more of this Indigenous wisdom and how we can apply it. And I'll share later on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Miles. Good stuff. All right, Victoria, if you're ready, take it away.
Hello all, and greetings from Oklahoma. As Melissa and I were discussing, I feel like Dorothy a little bit. I know I expect to. They're telling us tomorrow night around 2 in the morning, get ready to get in your shelter. And it looks like a lot of the country is going to be slammed again. So keep them in your thoughts. It's always like this in the spring, but not usually this often as far as the waves keep coming, as Miles was saying. Being in a state of energy, oil, gas, all of it, fracking rules here. I'm finding it easier and easier, though, to engage in conversations because as the issue becomes undeniable and in your face, and I think, as we've spoken before with Extinction Rebellion and just the news in general being more in the mainstream, that's why I was thinking about, I've contacted some schools, and it seems like the science teachers would be open to me coming in and volunteering and doing something like this. So I've done many workshops, but it's been for facilitating leadership for business organizations or university level. But I figure, to go in, they said like an hour program won't be hard to put together. So doing what we can and just trying to stay out of the storm shelter.
All righty, great to hear from you. Well, you be safe, sweetie. All right, next up is Melissa, Queen. Welcome, sweet.
Hey everyone. I'm really glad to be back on the Social Club. We've been having an amazing, amazing time. I've been in Mexico. This is my second trip this year. First came down here for about 10 days and got involved in a social justice project, which was fantastic. So my daughter Alice and I have been working with a group, a woman. She runs something called the Calderia, which is a soup kitchen. She's working with indigenous people, women, and children, and artists. And my daughter and I are working on a project called Eden. It's a environmentally friendly fashion project. And we helped organize a venue, which was dance, music, fashion, to fundraise for this amazing project. And we had our opening, Jamin and I both attended. It was super awesome with local dance companies, just beautiful, really indigenous, divine feminine, just brought their mythology in, just like really extraordinary. And we are now in Guanajuato, which is an amazing experience as well. And I really feel the sort of energy of the spirit of this place, these very ancient civilizations that have lived here. And there's still continuity with that here. So that's my update for now. Of course, when we get back to Whidbey, I'll get back onto the salmon project. There's been a lot of forward movement, really exciting things happening in Washington State. We're about, I believe, to get moving forward on an electric train project. Looks like that's going to go forward now. Washington State Ferries have just approved reducing sound, so they might go electric, I think, to help the orca survive. And it looks like Jay Inslee is really active in our state, doing all kinds of new legislation around the orca and energy bills. So that's really great. Just shows that our work is really having an effect. And just want to encourage everyone, however you can, just keep getting out there and keep voicing yourselves and keep doing cool projects, that are about this change. And let's be this change that we want to see in the world. Thank you. Damon, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, sweetie. All righty. Great to see everyone. Updates that, so been here in Mexico with Melissa and family for going on 10 days now. Been traveling around a fair amount, and a few more days, and then we'll fly up to San Diego on Friday, and then back to the state of Washington a few days later. Been focusing on in the last week plus, we've in terms of Radish, we've made a kind of a substantial transformation in strategy, whereas we were gung-ho to head to London in a few weeks and essentially team up with Extinction Rebellion and do performances there on the streets, bring the Darth Vader costume, bring the big signage, hand out flyers, and essentially make our case for collective intelligence. Well, in the last little over a week, we've had some amazing connections and furthered some conversations in the direction of building the platform for collective intelligence. So we've come to the conclusion that it makes more sense for us to stay put and focus on building out the platform for collective intelligence, while in parallel, Extinction Rebellion and other groups keep putting the word out and building the movement. And kind of the way I picture it in my mind is they're building this big movement, getting people together. But then the question is, what do they do with this movement? Where do they take it? What is the platform? I think the platform that Extinction Rebellion has is a bit oversimplistic, where they're basically putting the onus on the government to decarbonize the economy, which I think is number one, doesn't go anywhere near far enough in terms of the urgency of our present situation. And also relying on any government, I think, is relying on the wrong set of people. I think it needs to be much more grassroots and collective, involving all of us citizens of the world. And so that view is shared with a number of other folks who we're collaborating with. A little later, I'll mention the names of kind of their website. A few weeks ago, we had Shelley and Jan on, and Dr. Rao, and we're all basically of a similar mindset that what we can essentially do is let's build this platform and let's give the world a place that they can plug into to participate in these conversations and in co-creating all of the solutions that we need, including transforming governance and transforming the economy and culture and our story, our fundamental story of humanity, et cetera. So build that out, really have something to bring to the table that's ready to go that people can plug into, and then go and team up with the Extinction Rebellion and other groups and other movements and say, all right, now that we're all together and there's a huge critical mass of us who all get the urgency around this, now let's get together and co-create all the solutions that we need. So more to say about that. Anyway, that wraps it up for personal updates. Let's talk agenda items here for the rest of the program. One of the things I'd like to talk about is the topic of essentially experiential learning and transformational learning. And what comes to mind is landmark education, which has chapters all across the United States and even different countries around the world. Because one question that I've constantly been grappling with is, how do we get people to kind of make this shift to think in terms of the whole, as opposed to me, the individual, and what's best for me, and what kind of shelter can I build to withstand what's coming, and all that, me, which I also fall into all the time. How do we make that kind of intellectual, psychic, spiritual shift to thinking about the whole? And it occurred to me that it was actually a lot of my education at Landmark Education, particularly the advanced course within Landmark Education, that really helped me to kind of make that shift from individual to thinking about the whole. So that's one thing I'd like to contribute to the agenda. Just jump in if you have any other topics that you'd like to contribute to the agenda for discussing today. Just jump in. Any topics you'd like to
related to what you're talking about is something I'm mulling over quite a bit, and that is, first and foremost, even over and above an ecological emergency, is we have a mental health emergency. So, and that really relates to lots of what Daniel has brought to the social club, because if we don't attend to the collective consciousness of the planet and humanity to attend to those mental health needs, we won't, as you say, address the spiritual side of what's needed for these changes. So, thank you.
And
Start again, please, Doug.
I'd like to follow on with what Miles, you're saying. And I want to introduce the topic of working with angels and not just working as humans to bring about change.
You want to show the book?
Yeah, right now I am reading Matthew Fox's book, which is titled The Physics of Angels. Sorry about that, a lot of reflection here. Jamin hosted a Sierra Club talk 1 week ago, approximately.
Week and a half.
Week
Almost,
and a half.
yeah.
And Matthew Fox was one of the guest speakers. And I got this book from him at that talk. I am someone who actually has worked with angels, so it's a really good reminder, and I'd just like to open up this topic.
All right, very good. Well, that's kind of a good sort of triad. The mental emergency, experiential learning, and transformational education to help shift our mindset, and working with angels, even broader than just working with other humans. So anything else anyone would like to add to the topic list before we jump in?
Jamin, I don't think it's necessarily, I don't think there'll be time. It looks like what we already have on the agenda will probably lead into some pretty interesting conversations. I would say, and I think these topics will actually in some way be about it, but I think it's important to really identify in a consensual way what are the key constraints on humanity's consciousness that gets in the way of being able to see this from a much more urgent point of view, and to sort of also be able to reflect on what is actually driving us. I would just say Jamin, you yourself have had a whole series of ideas that you've come to, and each one of those ideas that let's say has a coherence about it. There's a logic to it and everything, but at a certain point in time, you say, well, it just doesn't seem to be able to be fully implemented. There are constraints that get in the way. And I think it is really, my naive hope for the platform, and this goes all the way back to the beginning when it was originally discussed, was that we would be able to use this platform to identify the constraints, and then to have the courage, I think, in some cases, to take on these constraints. Because they're very, very, there's a lot of powerful dynamics that get in the way of human beings being able to change their consciousness. So that, I just wanted to throw that in. It's, I guess you can put it as a agenda item if there's time, but we'll probably discuss it as we go along anyway.
Very good. Thank you, Dan. All right. Well, I say we jump in earnest. We've got a good mix. I'm just going to rattle it off here. We've got experiential learning for personal and communal transformation. We have the mental emergency per Miles, and we have working with angels. And Dan contributed the key constraints on humanity's consciousness. And I would say, the fundamental constraint, the biggest constraint that we have, is that we have been collectively duped by our modern culture of totalitarian agriculture, individualism, separation, ownership, this possession trance. We've talked about this a number of times. And one of the bottom lines of that is that each of us is kind of in this state of, urgency to hoard and survive. Let's face it, we're all trying to make it in a cruel world, in a cruel, difficult, hyper-competitive world. And, for me, that seems like the biggest constraint. What I'd really love is for us to just kind of bounce it around and have some kind of quick comments. So let's keep our comments maybe to a minute or so and just, give that a try rather than this sort of like Toastmasters format where one of us gets up and goes on a long monologue. Shall we all give that a try? Everyone game? Anyway, I'm going to go on mute. And sweetie, if you want to talk, just tell me and I'll. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Jamin, I'd love you to start talking about experiential learning.
Yeah.
Could you guide us into that? What do you mean by that? How do you see that happen?
Yeah. So my experiences at Landmark, first of all, quick hands up if you've taken either the Landmark Forum or have had any kind of introduction to Landmark education. Okay, hey, okay, sweet, awesome. Victoria, great to hear. So I'm just curious, Victoria, what have you taken the Landmark Forum? How far have you, or what's your experience there? And you're on mute, Victoria.
Very familiar with it. No, they were a client of mine at one time.
Oh, they were a client of yours. Interesting.
In a different life.
In a different life. Okay, very good. Okay, so you know the basics of it. So
Yeah.
I first took the Landmark Forum back in February 2009, and it was just totally transformational for me. It helped me see a lot of the personal blocks that I had. And it was like a 3.5 day intensive, 12 hours a day, intensive learning kind of retreat sort of thing. And then the next course after that is also a 3.5 day intensive called the advanced course. And in the advanced course, it's really about the community. So the basic Landmark Forum is about the individual. The advanced course is about community and that we're all in this together. And I remember coming back from one of the breaks on the first day, and a lot of people were late coming back from the break, and we were asked to share about our experiences around that. And I said, well, hey, I've done my part, right? I was here on time, and so I'm good, check, and it's really on the people who came back late. And the feedback I got was, Jamin, you're still operating at the level of individual. You're not operating at the level of the community and all of us getting it. And that really was the beginning of me making this shift, this transformation, to really seeing us all as a whole. And unless we all get it, we don't get it, and that we all have to get it. That's the goal, that everyone get it. And but it was through this experiential learning, which is totally distinct from, say, reading a book, right, and getting it intellectually. It's getting it in a group, in this group dynamic, where over the course of an extended period, in this case 3.5 days intensive, we really get this transformation, this shift happens within us. So anyway, that's just a little teaser. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in here. The experience being here in Mexico is very much about the collective. People really live as a community, and the family structure is really strong here. So even though there's a lot of poverty here, and there are some extremes, I haven't noticed the same amount of extremes or such great extremes as we have in America. And there's less homelessness, and people get fed. So if you see someone's having a hard time, people are giving food to people who are having this hard time. And the whole structure of the cities is structured around the collective. And I think that we can learn a lot from this. This going back to this community living, which is less one of competitiveness and one of co-creativeness. I'm also noticing that people have gifts, they're basket weavers, they embroider, there's a lot of artisanat, handmade things, which is also really important. that we in America have gotten away from. We've kind of so got into the technology and the mechanization of everything. We got away from this taking our time, making things by hand, working as a family of humans. There's a lot of nature in the city. So there are butterflies and birds and trees and plants, and there's this real love of the earth and cultivating and taking care of plants here, and the respecting the plants and the gods, the spirit behind everything that we enjoy here on this Mother Earth. Yeah.
Beautiful. All right. Love to hear from folks.
Yeah, I'll jump in.
Yeah, go ahead, Miles.
So, what is common to everything that has been said, the 3 items on the agenda, and including the one I presented, a mental health emergency, brings to mind YouTube videos and interviews of a gentleman named Johann Hari. And he's from England. He's done a lot of research into his own depression, and that led him to study the epidemic of loneliness on the planet. So this is the reason why there are so many people in our countries that have addictions, especially now to these deadly opioids. So until we attend to these needs, we'll never get people coming in community, as you've described, Melissa, to solve the problems, plural.
That is so correct, Miles. And another thing here is that when you're walking down the street, people say hello to you. When you're eating, because there are lots of little street vendors, you walk by people eating and they say provecho, which is like saying good appetite. So there's this constant interaction. So people are not isolated. They're not alone. People are included. And I think that's so correct, Miles, that mental illness comes from people feeling isolated, alone, excluded, and not part of this healthy whole of community, which is a community not just of humans, but of all of living beings, connecting with people. The animals are people. We have to get away from thinging everything and get back to honoring and having reverence and bring the understanding that we are all a family of living beings.
Beautiful. Beautiful. What comes to mind as I was commenting about the experiential learning through Landmark Education is the power of the retreat, because we're living in a crazy world, in a culture that's omnicidal and that's just, pushing us down this death spiral where, we feel this urgency to hoard and survive and in a very hyper-individualistic way. The beauty of the retreat is it, you literally retreat from this crazy world that we're in into, kind of an idyllic, transformational setting community, and in which transformation can happen. And building on what you just said, sweetie, the thought occurred to me that maybe we could create a retreat here in Mexico that's focused on both experiential learning, personal transformation, and collective transformation, and on the environmental crisis, on abrupt climate change and what we need to do about that. Kind of a holistic retreat in a culture that really supports that. And we could also participate in the sort of the social activism stuff that we've been involved in of late in Mexico City, for example. So it could all be one sort of combined thing. That's just a thought that's coming to me.
I love that.
Thank you. All right, more comments. I'm going to go on mute.
I couldn't agree more. I'm very proud of my hometown of Tulsa. We've added a lot of community space downtown where there's always artists and musicians playing. And I see that. And then you go places where it's the opposite. It's so isolated. And, You know, it's interesting. I love California, but when I go there, I notice there's either the interaction or complete isolation. And I think America, having traveled some of my life, is one of the ones that I find most like that, where it's you could walk by and never even make eye contact, which in some cities and at certain times we know you don't do that, but in general. So just wanted to say I completely agree. In a retreat, it's always good, I think, to be face to face when you can be. But it's also great that we have this platform so we can interact and share ideas. So thanks.
I'll just add the journalist I mentioned, Johan Hari of England. He talks again about his own personal depression and how he would go to see a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist would give him a pill, and the pill would work wonders for a little while for the first few months. Then he had to go back to the doctor and get more prescription, increased strength, and then he noticed, well, he's not actually attending to the root cause of his depression and his loneliness.
I am going towards becoming vegan, and what I have noticed is that my body is much happier and healthier. And one of the things that's coming to me when I was hearing you, Miles, is when animals go to the slaughterhouse, there's an enormous amount of fear. They're sentient beings. They have feelings. They understand that their death is coming. They're very smart. And all of that fear goes into the body of the animal, the tissues. And we are consuming that. And so we are consuming anxiety, we are consuming fear, we are consuming death. And I really think that that's kind of going into our cellular structure, and we are what we eat. And I'm just thinking, I'm wondering how much of that anxiety and fear that's creating depression is also coming from this food that we're consuming, as well as this collapse of our humanity, of our living holistically on the planet. I had trouble with my knee, trouble with my joints. All of that is gone. And Dr. Sailesh Rao talked about that from his own personal experience, and I am also experiencing that. So I really highly recommend any of you listening to try it out. Go vegetarian first if you can't handle the vegan right away. But I've really noticed a difference. It's huge.
Yeah, could I jump in and say a couple of things? Sorry, I was just pulled away. It was a phone call I had to take, so I missed a little bit of your discussion, Jamin, about the experiential learning, the landmark education. But coming in here on the back end and kind of picking up with what Melissa, you were just saying about meat eating. And, the other day, I happened to watch a video, documentary on Netflix. I think it was from maybe 2017. And, it was kind of this guy was sort of doing a Michael Moore thing with the issue of meat eating and various disease processes that were connected to it. And one of the things that, and I'm watching it and I may have seen it before and forgot, but it was covering familiar territory for me. And one of the things that, of course, where it went to is, so he's going around to the various health advocacy organizations, American Diabetes Association, American Heart Association, the cancer organizations, etc. And what he's doing is he's saying, I've been reading these research papers and I don't understand, say American Diabetes Association, why you have these meal plans that are totally inappropriate for someone who's diabetic. I mean, why would you be doing that? And then, of course, it gets to the fact that all of these food and drink corporations basically support the American Diabetes Association. And it's true for the cancer, and it's true for the heart. And so what we see is, we have such a corruption going on. And, we have to somehow deal with that. How can you have a situation where when I was working for the Chicago Department of Public Health, it became clear to me at a certain point. It took a while, but I finally, fully realized that we could never. The one rule that everybody understood was you do not say anything or push anything that goes against a corporate interest, which is very problematic for public health because most of the public health problems are connected to corporate interests and the damage that gets done as they seek profits at the expense of the communities. And so, as far as mental health goes, we have had a tremendous corruption in mental health. It's way beyond what most people even realize. A lot of people understand that, for example, the pharmaceutical industry and the psychiatric institution are fundamentally corrupt and really do not have much concern for the mental health of individuals and communities. They are just simply interested in take our medications that will probably reduce, if they work, your emotional upsets. And, they act as a partial anesthetic if they work, but you always build up a tolerance to them. And then you need more, or they can throw in a second one. And unfortunately, therapy, with all the various kinds of experiential or talk therapies that have existed. And I remember when I was in at a certain point, I was taught, we have 400 different schools, of therapy. And guess what? They all work. It just depends on the practitioner, et cetera, which was an absurd claim to ever make, because it really says what you're claiming is your unique contribution isn't really that valuable. If we can have 400 different ones that all contribute. And what, so when it comes to mental health, there's certain things which are kind of constants, and they're usually pushed aside because of the corporate interest or the interest of the practitioners. And so so when you're looking at this, I've made an attempt recently. I haven't really talked about it, but I'm trying to, get off of meat. And it's very hard for me to do that. Yeah. Just because, I've always been a real fan of eating meat, but I'm trying to move in that direction for a number of reasons. But the thing about, let's say, the vegan diet, or something, different ideas about it. But here's the thing: if it actually prevents the development of all these medical problems, which it seems you can argue that pretty effectively, then why aren't we talking about that in a serious way in the country? Why is it, why can't we do that? And I would just say, right now we have a completely fascistic form of government. It's just simply the corporations, including the finance variety, they pay off the I'll wind up. They pay off the politicians to go ahead and pass laws which basically allow them to increase their profits at the expense of the communities that they represent. And this is a horrible, and it's a constraint on climate change. And I do think, if you don't take this down, in a very effective way. We're going to lose on so many different levels. All right, I'm going to sign off here. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. I'd just like to give a brief little synthesis here of that. So what if we were to, create a retreat that is vegan, 100% vegan, and we talk about that at the retreat. That's part of the curriculum. We have exercises in curriculum in personal transformation, and I would actually recommend that everyone take the Landmark Forum and as kind of like a soft prerequisite, not an absolute prerequisite, but sort of a soft prerequisite, because to the extent that we can, that people can do some of this transformational work in a structure that already exists and is extremely effective, Landmark Education, and then we come to this vegan retreat where we focus on kind of the higher levels of communal collective transformation, right? And building this community and addressing abrupt climate change and actually convening collective intelligence. We could put together a whole curriculum. And also wanted to comment that the social club at the end of the world is a form of retreat. I mean, how many of you have experienced, you come to one of our amazing social club meetings that goes on for like 2 or 3 hours or more, and you come out of it and you're just like, wow, you're in it and you're just like, wow, what an amazing space. I'm just so glad I was able to retreat from this crazy world for a while and be in this very safe space that's also about transformation. I've experienced that a number of times, and thank you, Victoria. Yeah, I see heads nodding. So, this is kind of one form of retreat is the social club. But what if we did like a week-long retreat, vegan retreat, where we really grapple with these fundamental issues? I think that and then you come home from that and you're like, wow, that was so amazing, and you tell your friends, and the next thing you know, we have it has sort of like an ongoing thing. Guy McPherson and Pauline down in Belize, I think we're groping for this kind of retreat experience. Of course, they packed up and have moved back to the United States from Belize, but it was an interesting and perhaps valiant attempt at it. Anyway, just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, I'd like to suggest something as well. If we had a retreat, created a retreat here in Mexico, what I would like to suggest is that this is not just a retreat where we go inward, but that somehow we do a social engagement project with Mexican people here. There's so much going on trying to create borders, and I think it's really important if we're role modeling how to create a new world, a new story, a new society, that we model that. And I would like to suggest that as part of that we have some kind of social engagement project where we're engaging with local people and doing something creative together. It could be an artful activist thing, could be cooking a meal, I don't know, something. Working with youth, but that somehow there's an engagement that happens.
Well, that's a great idea. And it could be everybody, you could create the template where we have Dr. Salish Rao and all of his excellent documentaries and his research. And, Jamin, your expertise in knowing what it takes to host a retreat, a Sierra Club dinner, but more of a retreat now. I think that's a fabulous idea. And, the template, the documents, and whatever the organizational strategy, system, operating procedure, whatever you want to call it, Jamin, you'd post that and people could just grab it and say, yeah, okay, we'll do one here in Calgary. And we can connect on a Hangout, if everybody did them, at the same time and day type thing, an international retreat. So nobody's flying around, right? One other thing I'd like to also propose into the mix is maybe a shift away from the intergovernmental panel on climate change, and we start actually talking the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem. It's a mouthful, but this ecological emergency report that was just released by this similar organization of scientists working for the UN. They focus on the ecology collapse. You know, let's just get away from the whole discussion about carbon dioxide. You know, I'm not just diminishing it, but it's an invisible, odorless, tasteless gas that people can always just say, well, it's plant food. I use plant food. Well, yeah, it's plant food, but it's also a greenhouse gas. So let's just move from there and start talking about the collapse of the insect populations, the great mammals, what we're doing to our domestic food animals as well, that horror story. And just really, you know, okay, yeah, well, yeah, carbon dioxide. Well, you know, what about the forest that you see disappearing on the planet? Let's talk about what you can actually see. You can look this summer, how many bugs did you have on your grill of your car? So you don't want to talk about CO2 as plant food? Well, then we should get some more plants growing so they can consume that plant food. Anybody against that? No. You know what I mean? And this climate change word, Ralph Nader just recently posted, and I've heard it before, that the word climate change, the phrase, was generated by the Republican Party. Because back in 2003, one of their PR people said, you know, that saying global warming is kind of a scary thing. It's better if we use climate change, you know, because it's a lot more benign. So anyway, let's just move out of that whole conversation and start talking ecological collapse.
I agree completely. I think that the semantics is huge in this, and I think we've got to call attention, just like Extinction Rebellion is. If it is dire.
Yeah, so back. This is really good stuff, everyone. You know, so back. And Miles, I really like your idea of doing local retreats that we can then all connect together through, you know, video conferencing. And I just want to share that some of the stuff that some of the folks that I mentioned, I've been connecting with. If I can find it here. Oh yeah. There's this 24 hours of wholeness event that's being planned for September 21st that I've been working on, connecting with Shelley and Jan, who were on a few weeks ago. One of their websites is togetherincreation.org. But anyway, I think we've got this. What's really becoming clear is that coming together and working on this together, whether in a retreat, whether in, you know, the social club, a new platform we're working on, World Serious / On the Whole, 24 hours of wholeness, but really people coming together and working on this transformation, personal transformation, communal transformation, global transformation, in a way that works. You know, a vegan retreat combined with social activism, ecological activism, planting trees, picking up garbage, etc., and then also co-creating other actions that we can take. Anyway, I'm just that seems to be where we're kind of converging here, right? Mm-hmm.
I just want to jump in and just let you guys know that San Francisco just banned plastic bottles. Yes, so fantastic. And I also, if you guys are down with this, I just want to read a little piece from Matthew Fox's book on angels. And he asks, why are angels returning today? Might it be that the return of the angels can inspire our moral imagination? Can they give us the courage to deal more effectively and imaginatively with these issues as we move into the third millennium? And I think that's something really to contemplate. You know, this way through meditation or ceremony, or just contemplation, connecting with whatever you want to call it, you know, spirit, creator, angelic force, connecting with and co-creating with, so that we can find solutions and bring this force, this energy into this physical realm, this experience of this physical realm, to exactly this co-creative, inspired use of our imagination to find solutions and to bring about beautiful change. We're at a pinnacle now where we can really, and I feel it happening all around us, we're just being lifted up, even though everything is falling apart and getting sucked down. There's this counter movement that's an upward movement that can create miracles, I believe, even through hardship, death, and destruction.
Well, it seems like we would at least want to go that way, you know? I mean, if we don't, we're consumed with the loneliness and all of those things. So I think this very club is indicative of us trying to actually do that.
Yeah, and you know, I'll just add, there's just a crazy thing happening here in Canada with respect to politics. We are getting these governments that are, you know, wanting to build pipelines and carry on with fracking, and a conservative government in Ontario actually cut the funding to plant trees. That's how ridiculous they are. And there's a threat that there could be millions of these little trees that are in these greenhouses actually just going into the garbage because the current newly elected government says, oh no, we're not going to spend money, we don't have money for planting trees. How ridiculous. So anyway, you know, if we could get people in Ontario riled up with this concept, they could all just go and grab those trees and go and have this big retreat and have a big, you know, vegan festival and plant these trees. Anyway, anybody in Ontario hears this, that's what you got to do. I'll help.
It's called a retreat.
A retreat. Retreat. A vegan retreat.
I think this artful guerrilla activism, like going and getting those trees and planting them, it has to happen. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Absolutely.
Well, the taxpayers
those trees,
own those
Miles.
trees. The trees are owned by the people of Ontario, I'm quite certain. So it's their trees. Go get them.
Get your planting group together and go plant those trees.
Could I jump in just for a second?
Sure.
You know, speaking of a retreat, and you know, in Mexico, for example, you know, one of the things that I've talked about, I think it's really critical, is you know, tribalism and you know, racial tribalism and religious tribalism are horrific constraints on raising consciousness right now. And I think, you know, it's been probably, you know, it's so long since I've been involved in a, you know, kind of a group. Back in, I think, maybe the late 80s, early 90s, I participated in a psychosynthesis group that was pretty intense. You know, sometimes we'd meet Friday night and then all day Saturday, Sunday, etc. And you know, for about 3 years now. Of course, it always it was a mixed bag. You know, at the end of the day, you had people, you know, coming from different points of view and so on. And but I think that, you know, something that would be really useful would be able to discuss how attached we are to tribalistic, you know, kind of cultures, and to you know, see, you know, and it's usually never talked about in a certain way. You know, so for example, if you have Mexicans, you have Americans, you have a mix. Certainly, it would be great to have Israelis, participating, but to be able to actually talk about what's going on with it, and how much is it a factor. I'll just say again one thing that I've been reading this book. It's called I think it's called Yahweh to Zionism, and the part that I've read right now is very interesting because it talks about how, according to the author, prior to Yahweh, the fundamentally Jewish tribal god, you had mostly polytheistic systems, and that nations would try to connect up to one another by noting the comparisons between the different gods and the similarities. So, you had a sun god in this particular culture and something very similar to a sun god in another culture, and they would try to respect the similarities, the meanings. However, when Yahweh, and I've always understood it that it's a. I used to joke, if he sounds, of course, he sounds more like a devil than a god, and of course he has basically been somewhat transformed in Christianity, but pretty much in the Jewish religion and the Islamic religion, their Allah. It's very, very tribalistic, and it's a huge problem, and most people don't understand it. As I'm reading this, I remember thinking, well, the Jewish God, which was carried to the other religions of the book, was basically progressive in the sense that it was now, you had one God, just one God, and kind of removed. But actually what I've, learned is that, yeah, it was one God, but it was in opposition to all other gods. And that particular God, Yahweh, wanted to defeat all groups that had different gods, and so there was only one God, one tribe. Now today in Israel, even though it's a completely different era and everything, it's a huge factor. It's a blood tribal thing, and so to be able to discuss these things, not just say to people always say everybody should be able to have their religion and it's all nice and it's all good, but I think everybody knows it really isn't that way. It isn't nice and good, to be able to step up and try to talk about these things, and that includes the racial tribalism. I joke with, my girlfriend who's Mexican, and but she's a pretty Caucasian Mexican, and I sometimes joke with her that when things start to regress down in Mexico, the mestizos are going to be coming after the blancos, pretty fast, and I we kind of all have, I think, on a not that far from consciousness and understanding that that's what's going to happen. So I think if we had some sort of a retreat or some sort of a mechanism where these things could really be talked about, it would be very beneficial. And I do think these are huge constraints. And also with a retreat, if we have one, or a number, having people be up to speed on certain topics is probably a kind of useful thing. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Go ahead, Sue.
Just Miles and Dan, I just wanted to add to kind of what you guys are saying. One of the things, again, that's coming back to me is LOVE, love. So if you can come back into a state of love where we realize that we're actually interdependent with the greater community, and that rather than trying to seize what others have, we need to come back to creating a community of sharing, giving and sharing. And Miles, I just wanted to make a suggestion to you for this tree planting. I think it could be really interesting if you could get hold of some of those trees, actually invite the tribe you're working with to have a ceremony where you're educating people and you're bringing them back into the spirit of understanding tree people. And then have, after some kind of blessing ceremony, you have the community engagement and work with youth. Get the kids to plant these trees. They're our new little saplings. I think you could make a really beautiful event where people aren't feeling threatened. It's an artful, loving act that you could do with your local community. I just wanted to suggest that.
Thanks. That's a great idea, and I'll look into it. Ontario is a long way from where I live in Alberta, but I am being encouraged by the conversation to dig into this subject, because I just saw this posting on Facebook yesterday or something about these trees possibly headed for the dump because of no budgeting. Something to talk about in line, segueing on to what Daniel was talking about. Carl Jung, he talked a lot about how humanity has to rise above their tribalism, and he looked at it as a very scientific psychologist, as much as a psychologist can, make a science out of the soul. But Dr. What's his name? I'm getting these senior moments more frequently. There's Dr. Hollis, I believe his name is. He says, think of the soul as being your meaning seeking and your meaning creating organ. If you had an organ in your body that was dedicated to meaning seeking and meaning creating, that would be what you would call the soul. So this is a book that has become a huge bestseller just in the last couple of months, written by Dr. Murray Stein, titled Jung's Map of the Soul, an Introduction. And there's a K-pop, a Korean pop music band of young men who are a worldwide phenomena at the moment. And all of their music and dance and storyline is based on this book, which is all about mental health. So they just recently, they're selling out stadiums in the United States as we speak. When their Map of the Soul Persona album debuted on April 12th, it immediately went #1 in 70 countries. And it's strange. Like my daughter was first listening to this Korean music, and I'm walking by her room, and she's got these Koreans singing, and she doesn't speak Korean. Anyway, somehow, for whatever reason, these young men have become a huge phenomenon, and they recently teamed up with a female singer I'd never heard of before named Halsey. And anyhow, somehow, Jamin, we got to connect with the youth of the group BTS and the BTS Army, and get these people thinking about the ecological emergency and how we have to rise, as Daniel mentions, above our individual religions. It's not to say that those religions don't have tremendous psychic importance to people, but there's now a time when we have to come together to something higher, which you talked about, Melissa, and this is this concept of love, that we are all children of love. And nobody has to say, oh, I'm no longer Jewish, or no, I'm no longer Christian. My personal perspective on it is I'd say I come from a Christian heritage now, but I'm taking on this identity of a child of love. Hopefully I can live up to it. And everybody else, we're all from the same source, right? So if you believe in the story of Adam and Eve, which is a psychic fact, it doesn't have to be a physical fact, but all of these things are what Jung called psychic facts. And so consequently, we are one family, and we're all a product of this greater consciousness. Melissa talked about love.
Beautiful, Melissa.
Beautiful. Wow. Building off of what Deanna was talking about earlier about tribalism, and now that you mentioned this Korean group, I think there's a huge opportunity for the retreats that we're talking about to have different groups from different tribes, different cultures, languages, etc., come together and have their sort of, inter-tribe transformational experience and experiential learning, etc., and then systematically in an orchestrated way bring these different groups together to have interactions where we I remember when I was in the Amigos program that trained me to come here to the state of Guanajuato in the summer of 1984 to do my first volunteer program here. We did a program where we divided, I was living in Seattle at the time during the school year getting trained, and on one weekend retreat precisely, we did this one experience on a Saturday night that I'll never forget. The whole group was about 35 of us, was divided into two groups. One group was taught this sort of very American game where we've got all these cards and we do this card trading and we're each trying to maximize our total number of points or whatever, essentially this game of hoarding. The other group was taught a totally different game, which was all about sharing and community and, hey, how's your uncle doing and all that. And, it was very Latin. It was all done in English. And then what happened was they started to sort of gradually take people from one group and put them into the other group. So the people from the kind of the Latin American cultural sharing group were given, some cards they didn't quite know what to do with. They came into the American group, and of course they were swarmed by Americans trying to, trade cards and trade up and take from them essentially, and then, the people from the American group went into the Latin American group where it's all about sharing. And they were just like, what's going on? Why aren't these people trading cards? And so we start to surface our differences. And in doing so, we can also surface our contradictions and our hypocrisies and the ways in which our cultures are destructive. And then have this kind of, intertribal sharing and transformation. And say, well, here's what I experienced from your culture. Here's what I experienced from yours. How do we become one, brotherhood, sisterhood of humanity and with all other species. And so, that then, take it out to the world. Melissa and I have had beautiful experiences picking up garbage and feeding wildlife and whatnot, and the interactions with them that have just been profoundly spiritual. So I think we can do all the above if we design the retreat.
Can I just do a quick shout out? I'd be remiss if I don't acknowledge, the work of Skip Conover, Donald L. Skip Conover, who I've introduced to the group. He's the retired U.S. Marine officer, lives in Annapolis, Maryland. He's the founder of the Carl Jung Depth Psychology Reading Group. And, you invite him every time I think he's on your mailing list. However, he's so busy with his particular YouTube channel, but I would encourage people who are interested in this BTS Korean pop music group and Carl Jung and what we could do to reach out to those youth, because everything we're talking about here, we pretty well have to just leap over the people that are, in the middle of our economy, working and slaving away in the industrial civilization, and that they've got to put food on the table. But the youth, they're waking up. It's really just the other day I saw this girl. I think she was actually in Victoria, British Columbia, 14 years old, and she's just breaking down in tears, because the youth are very, very much in touch with the seriousness of this situation, right? And these Friday global school strikes are just an indication of that. So we need to just, appreciate every generation that's in between is out there slaving away in the workforce, but and encourage them to carry on putting food on the table. But we have to do an end run of the system and change the paradigm.
I'd like to add to what you're saying, Miles, that I think we need to pass the baton. I think a lot of us adults and young elders are hanging on to the baton. And I think we can create platforms for youth. I think they're very awake and attuned to what's going on. And they're very disappointed by early, us older people, not waking up, not in continuing, the same old saying, the same as we've been practicing for the last, I'll just say 300 years, but even though it started before this. But I think one of the suggestions actually my daughter made to us a while back was to bring youth together through like a festival, music, dance, different things. And I think this kind of is paralleling, or if it's not actually the same thing you're saying, Miles, we could, talk about this Korean band. I think there could be a retreat, but there could also be these activities that we create around bringing people together from different cultures around music, using the arts as an expression for change, for this vehicle of change. And then I just wanted to quote one more thing from Matthew Fox's book. He actually sat down and met with an Irish woman. Her name is Lorna Byrne, Byrne. And she actually works with angels. And one of the things she said to Matthew was, we all have a part to play in the spiritual evolution of humanity. And I think that's a really powerful thing and correctly said, and I think it's something we need to remember. So I love the idea of this retreat, Jane, and I think that's great. I think part of that retreat could be organizing some kind of festival, bringing groups together, artists together. Artists kind of break the rules and often work with visions. I think we need to have vision now, not programs. We need to not institutionalize things. We don't need to replace old institutions with new ones. We need to replace institutions with vision, not programs. And then we all co-create together this society of sharing, gifting, planting, cleaning up. I could go on, but I'll stop here.
Yeah, well, there's a real thirst, for this deeper consciousness because, for example, there's a gentleman, a University of Toronto professor named Jordan B. Peterson, and he's just an average professor. However, he has a very down-to-earth style. And now I don't agree with everything that he says. I'd love to have a bit of a debate on some aspects of what he says. But he went from just local notoriety in Toronto as a good professor to a phenomena around the world. And he now has 2 million YouTube subscribers. If you want to find out about Jordan Peterson, look up interviews on Joe Rogan. But the reason I bring him up is there's such a thirst for this deep thinking that he and Joe Rogan as well. They have these YouTube programs where people tune in for 2.5 hours straight, sitting in one place for 2.5 hours, listening to these people converse about psychology and lots of other deep issues. So it just shows you that there's an untapped, unaddressed thirst for these retreats and deep conversation.
Totally. And if we could have these retreats, like I said earlier, about having different tribes or different languages or cultures or nations or however you divide it up, and then have them come together. Likewise, we can have youth retreats and where youth of I think the youth are more ready to assimilate with youth of other cultures. So we may not need to even have the divisions by culture or by nation. Maybe just have them by language for the youth. But then pass the baton. We older people, we suck, so let's just pass the baton to the youth and let them figure it out. No, let's all figure it out together, but let's have the appropriate sort of, segmented retreats, and then this coming together, this sort of synthesis where we bring the different groups together. Anyway, Dan, you were about to jump in.
Yeah, I want to, the issue of kind of moving to a loving orientation or perspective. For most people, it appears to me that love, it can mean different things. There can be the love of parents towards children, children towards parents, kind of expanded out to family, and then maybe community, country. As you expand, and the thing is, and then we have also, we could say, romantic, erotic love between people. But here, and it seems like it's a good thing. I agree. And love as opposed to hatred and competition it sounds good. But I think, again, even the concept of love needs to be deconstructed, because people have different ideas as to what that means. And again, I'll just go back to, the Jewish tribe. Basically, I would say there's a lot of love in the Jewish tribe for members of the tribe. And you have to, as some people have pointed out, it's again a blood tribal thing. The Nazis, who tried to exterminate the Jews at a certain point, were basically coming from exactly the same place. Pure Aryan blood, tribal. And again, here we are, climate change, abrupt climate change, ecological suicide, whatever you want to, collapse. It's coming on probably pretty hard and furious right now. We don't, we may have time. I'd love it if we, somehow could say, okay, when I first heard Guy McPherson, 2030 plus or minus 9 years. Well, that gives you from, maybe 2021 to 2040. Which is, at least hopefully it's not 2021. Now he's at this point, and others have started to talk about, you'll be lucky if you can, get past 2026. But I don't understand rationally how we can not use that, the exponential nature. Maybe it won't go that way. That would be great. We'd all be happy and could, maybe pursue a lot of things. But if we accept that as a premise, then I think, and again, I'll say, I don't see any difference in a lot of ways between young people and older people. Older people, have a different kind of outlook on things because they're a lot nearer to knowing, regardless of climate change, things come to an end. You've had your life, you've done what you can, good, bad, etc. And it's going to end. And young people have a long, kind of a perspective. They don't realize how short it is when they're young. But we're basically the same emotionally. We all have the hardwired set of emotions. We all have the same kind of vulnerability or tendency towards certain kinds of attachments. And even these loving attachments, when you say love, between family members. It goes bad all the time. Jealousy gets in the way. Feelings of vengeance for perceived disrespect, and unfairness gets in the way. Love can turn very, very ugly quickly. And I think that, yes, when we're talking about love for Mother Earth, which sustains us, I love Mother Earth and I can appreciate it in certain ways, but I also love food and I love water. I don't normally, use the word love for those things. I love other, being able to socialize. But I do think that we need to stress similarities and to be able to deconstruct so many of these things that just kind of move us along in certain ways. So, okay, all right.
Daniel, I will send you a documentary, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation documentary on psychopaths. And for a definition of love, what I would suggest, we think of love as reconciliation. And just as an example, parents, especially mothers, they're very good at reconciling the good and the evil, in any little child that they bring into the world. And there's a very touching element to this documentary on psychopaths where a psychologist himself speaks to the fact that he actually has a son who is a psychopath. And, it breaks his heart, but he's reconciling that he has a son who he loves unconditionally, who's actually a psychopath, and he has to reconcile this person's times of truth with a lot of times of lying and deception. So anyway, I just like to offer that as the definition of love is an ability to reconcile at all levels of relationship. And I think that's where the mother is supreme, in doing that.
I also want to jump in and say something about love because it's one of my favorite topics, of course. I think we are heading towards a understanding of love that's different from the way we have secularized it. Actually, love is learning our connection with the divine, with God, with Creator. And I think humanity is headed that way. It's not so much about interpersonal love, although I think that's where we learn about it. And if I just take off what you're saying, Dan, about loving food, loving having a good meal, loving sitting under a beautiful tree, I think these are aspects of the divine, but I think we've forgotten that because we've got McDonald's. We secularized food, and we don't have the time any longer to sit under a tree and just be present, just be. And I think we need to get back to that state. And again, my experience here in Mexico has really reminded me of this, that so much revolves around meals, revolves around food. And it's not secularized, it's sacred. You share the food, you honor the food. It's prepared in this loving way. Last night, Jamin and I went to a hole in the wall with these grandmothers cooking, and they were enjoying themselves. So there's something about that engagement with whatever you're doing that I call love. And it's where you really get to a state of reverence and connection. And I think we've got disconnected and we don't practice reverence any longer. Everything is bought and sold, and we have to get out of that. So how do we do that? How do we inspire that? How do we get back to that place? I think personally it's going to be a shift in out of this consciousness of not having a shift back into praising things again.
All righty. Well, we're getting close to the end of our time here, at least Melissa and my availability. If y'all want to continue, please feel free to do so. We'll let it roll.
I have to go, but I just wanted to say goodbye to everyone and everyone watching, and love you all. Have a really safe week and appreciate you.
Take care, Victoria.
Thank you, Victoria. Love you too, sister.
Let us know how it goes with the tornado watch.
Okay.
Be safe.
Yeah.
Be safe, Dorothy. Get Toto indoors.
All righty. How are people feeling? Are we ready to?
Yeah, no, I need to go too, so probably want to.
Thank
Yeah.
you guys.
All right.
Love all your spirit and your input.
Love you all.
Appreciate you.
Great hanging with you all. And we'll see you
Bye,
next week.
everybody. See you next
See
All right.
ya.
All right. Take care, everyone. See you soon.